Everybody, this is Janet Belsky, and we are on to the beginning of the growing old part of my lifespan lecture series. And we're going to start with an overview of the aging body. How do we change physically as we get older? Learn everything you wanted to know about the process of physical aging and how it differs across time and from person to person. True or false? Old age starts at 65. That's a traditional marker. You're 65, you're old, right? In the past, did we really revere people who lived to their 80s? That's another one of our myths. In the US, whites live longer than Latinos. Well, of course they do. They're richer. They're less likely to eat badly in terms of, the fatty diet. They're less likely to have diabetes. Is that true? Women are healthier than men? Of course they are. They live longer. And we can now extend the maximum length of how long we live. A lot of people will tell you we're on the brink of doing that. I'm here to tell you that all of those statements are false. So let me begin to make my case by looking at a short history of life expectancy. Now, here's an important term. Average life expectancy is your 50-50 chance of living to a certain age. And we're going to look at how that's changed. If we look in 1800, if we had statistics, but I think they've estimated it, the average life expectancy was like in the 20s in every area of the world. So why was that? The real reason is that babies didn't live to adult life. And so many babies died that if you made it to adult life, you were in the minority. It was really early deaths that drove that figure. Deaths were rampant from neglect. Parents would leave their kids out, didn't watch them. Poisoning. Everything was poisonous. You could get poisoned very easily. And accidents, oh yeah. We didn't have the same ideas about parenting, which we will talk about in our parenting lecture. We kind of let babies roam the countryside. And the major reason is that all these diseases that are curable now, we had, and those were the diseases that killed basically in youth. Those are called infectious diseases. And we had a whole list of them that we used to die from. It's tuberculosis, polio, scarlet fever, yellow fever, a whole list. And once we could get rid of them, life expectancy shot up. When did that happen? It's a landmark. In the early decades of the 20th century, public health and vaccines are really the most important achievement of human beings. And of course, antibiotics engineered a 30-year increase in average life expectancy in the affluent areas of the world. And here we have yellow and light green. That's 68 years, 1950 in the United States, Canada, 61 here. Places in the world that we call highly developed at this point, we can expect to live to 65 and above. That's a landmark. By the way, in the past, people just didn't live to their 80s at all. But some of them lived maybe to 60. Those were the old people in the past. Since 1950, we have made huge increases in the time that we can live, particularly once we've turned 65. And life expectancy has floated to over 80. That's really old age in the developed world. For the first time in history, we can expect a baby that is born in the affluent areas of the world to live to old age. But we come up against a marker, and that marker is called our maximum lifespan. Scientists put it at somewhere between something 100, others say 105, somewhere around 105. Now, we may have a few people that may escape that. Those are the super centenarians living to about 110, but that's like a handful of people throughout the world. We are basically programmed to die sometime after 100 biologically. And here we have a chart. Your probability of dying once you reach 100 is 50% within the next couple months. That's our biological limit. How does getting old progress? Well, here's the pattern. First, you start with normal aging, and we can see this in athletes. He's 30. I think he might be too old to play. They are pushing their body to the maximum. So we see a decline from the absolute maximum functioning, which typically happens in the 20s. And normal aging starts really in the 20s. That's when things start to, as we say, go downhill a little bit. But you're fine. Everything's good. Doing great. You can run the marathons. And then when you hit about your 50s and 60s, varies from person to person, you get a thing called chronic disease. And here we go with, fine, I can still walk. I walk every day. I'm doing pretty well, but I have a little bit of osteoporosis. I have a cataract. All those diseases are the end points of the normal aging process that began to occur in our 30s. So we can list some of them: a little bit of heart disease, a little bit of arthritis. That's another major thing. Those are things that start out very slowly, and then when they reach sort of the end point, they're labeled chronic disease. Moving right along the lifespan, as you get into your 70s, they accumulate and you have trouble with daily life. That's fancy word is called ADL, activities of daily living. So here this guy is having trouble walking. He's okay, but he's having trouble maybe making it to the store, maybe cooking, walking around. Late 70s and 80s is the zone of ADL impairments. And then of course you die. That's what happens. Here's when we typically reach old age. It is not the 60s. Most people, particularly affluent people, as we'll mention, are going to be fine in the 60s. But when you reach your late 70s, that's the age when you start to develop the ADL impairments. That's the cutting point between the young old and the old, as we call it in gerontology. Here's a graph. Disabilities are small, 18 to 44, it's pretty small, 45 to 64, then they get a bigger, late 60s to early 70s, more chance of being disabled, at least with a small disability. These are big disabilities. And then 75 to 84, this is not a good statistic. 63.7% have some disability, 2 and 3, and some of them, 41%, have a severe disability. That would be having trouble actually showering, getting out of bed, eating. Those are severe ADL impairments. And then once you reach 85, it's the majority. And that's when you end up, those are the people in the nursing homes or in assisted living. The average age is going to be in the 80s and typically over 85. So here's how life expectancy varies, taking a more deep dive in affluent nations. We still have the poor nations where we're doing pretty badly with infectious diseases and public health measures. Some places it's dark green. That means a life expectancy average of over 82. And we can see them right here: Canada, Australia, the Far East. And wait a second, the United States isn't doing so well. The upper 70s, we fell off the affluent chart. I mean, we're still affluent, but we fell off the most long-lived group of countries. And the major culprit is working class men. Okay, so here we have a very informative chart. This is life expectancy at 50, not at 0. Here it was in 1980. Yeah, still differences by social class. And now upper middle class men and the richest men can live to almost 90 on the average at age 50. But poor men, it hasn't budged at all. So the life expectancy gap in the US has widened between the richest and poorest people. And for women, there's still a gap. It's about 10 years. It's 15 years between the most affluent and the men that are really at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Many of these men die in middle age. So that's the opioid epidemic, alcoholism, not being married, and basically low status is poison for men. It's not good for women, but it's like really the capper for men. I think the marriage thing is very important too. So here we have an example of the kind of thing that we feel about lower class men: very depressed. Rich man, poor man makes a big difference in the United States, particularly. He's kind of angry. and he can just do whatever he wants. Here's how it varies by ethnic group. And here we got a big surprise. These are the guys, the Asian Pacific Islander. They are the longest living. That makes a lot of sense to us, doesn't it? But the second group is Latinos, Hispanics. Latinos live longer than whites by about 3 years on the average in America. This is the white chart, and this is the Latino chart. Latinos are living on the average to about age 82 now. And then, of course, we have Blacks. They're still, kind of in the bottom of the life expectancy chart, which we can clearly know just by eyeballing it. But Latinos, why is that happening? Stay tuned, and I'm going to give you my ideas later in this lecture. Everybody knows women live longer, and it's actually on average 5 or 6 years in the developed world. But the gender gap varies in very interesting ways by nation. Here we have in the EU, it's 5.5 years. This is 2014, but the same statistics apply now. The Netherlands, it's 3.5 years. And Lithuania, it's over 10 years. Once again, what we're dealing with here are vast differences in income inequalities and access to medical care. In the Netherlands, everybody has free medical care, and the income inequalities between people are much smaller. And in Lithuania, there are huge gaps by socioeconomic class, and you don't have, a universal healthcare system. Interesting fun fact, Russia has one of the largest life expectancy gaps between men and women. And this is a stereotype. The men are into alcoholism. There are a couple of oligarchs at the top of the hierarchy, but men basically have a very hard time making a decent living, which is the male prerogative. What's the male-female path? Looking more deeply. Okay, so here we have, this would be a Y, this would be an X. That's the sperm. Ys are lighter and faster swimming, and they're more likely to make it to the egg. So more males are conceived, but Ys don't have as much genetic material in them, so they're more fragile. So men are more fragile biologically than women. Men are the weaker sex. Here we have women. Women have to give birth. Basically, women are healthier than men. More females make it through the birth canal. And it goes on throughout childhood when men are more likely to die off of illnesses and accidents. Some of that's environmental and some of it may be biological. About age 20, 23, the gap is about equal between men and women. Men is just many men and just as many women. And then as you move up, there's a real killer of men in midlife called a heart attack. Men are much more susceptible to getting sudden heart attacks and cardiac problems. That's a male thing. Women get them too. Very important. Don't think it's not women, but men are much more likely in midlife to die suddenly of a heart attack. So are women healthier than men? Well, not really. Men are more likely to die in health, and women are more likely to spend many years disabled. And all you have to do is look around to see that one in progress. They live longer, but the downside is they're more likely to be disabled. They're more likely to live alone because, of course, they're widowed. It's almost 50% in the 80s for women. Women are more likely to be poor. They were poor anyway because they earned less than men. But even if they start upper middle class, they're more likely to get poor once they develop ADL impairments in old age. Here we have the statistic. It's higher for women than for men. I just want to point out, we have managed to keep poverty at bay for the elderly by all of our social programs. So what is obscuring this is only very small, not small, but it's a smaller percentage of women and men live in poverty simply because of Social Security and Medicare. Made a huge difference in life expectancy and living to old age, not in abject poverty. Now we're going to wage war. How do we wage war against aging and death, which is our universal fountain of youth, okay? The only strategy that has worked, and it doesn't work necessarily in humans, we haven't tried it in humans, is a thing called underfeeding. Now, for about a century, they have known that rats that have a maximum lifespan of 1.5 years, you can increase their maximum to about 3 years by systematically underfeeding them, giving them very, very good nutrition, but smaller calories than you would normally have. That would be about 1,000 calories in human terms, but very healthy diet. You start at birth, often it'll push up puberty in rats, and they will live longer. What's going on here? Well, it's almost like putting a car in the garage and not taking it out that often. You need to take it out, but not running it to death metabolically. So the very few studies that we have on really experiments, controlled studies on underfeeding, we can only do it for a couple of years, suggests that it does push down the risk factors for chronic disease, particularly things like diabetes, which is a universal ager. You get healthier if you give a very nutritious diet, but less calories. That's why they do the intermittent fasting kind of deal. Therefore, pushing down the wear and tear on our body, which is causing us to age. But there is a major downside. First of all, you have to do it for years. When I say years, I mean decades. Who's going to do that? And the other thing, of course, is, you could walk out in front of a truck and get killed. So, deciding you're going to extend your life, there are people doing that by underfeeding is not a typical mode for people. We want to enjoy our lives, don't we, guys? And eating is one of the joys of life. We can enjoy our life and we can push up our average life expectancy. And one of the major things that we can do, and this is like, I've heard this from a million people, Belsky, is exercise. Now we have hundreds of studies that if you exercise, it can postpone or slow ADL impairments. And even if you exercise when you have ADL impairments, it can help you stay healthier longer. So I'm a big fan with everybody else of exercise. And I started later in life and it's really made me a lot healthier. But here's what I'm really interested in. Exercise actually increases synapse formation. Now, the synapses are the end of your neurons. It makes them thicker. So exercise in rats really improves the brain physiologically. And I'm going to keep doing it because, naturally I'm my age, I'm worried about my brain. So I'm using exercise really to help my mind. And most important, it's going to make me healthier for longer and it's going to make me feel good physically. And what else am I going to do? Well, I'm going to have good relationships. Relationships is one magic pill for longevity. Marriage is strongly related to life expectancy, good marriages. Spouses take care of each other. Spouses are richer. Having a cushion in life, a spouse or partner, being married, caring partner is very, very important. And it explains, to my mind, the Hispanic paradox, because they're more likely to be poor and they're more likely to, quote, have a different kind of diet, not our Mediterranean diet, but Hispanics, as I mentioned, are outliving whites. The only thing that we can tie it to is loving intergenerational families. That's my medicine. Even if I don't live longer, I'm having a loving relationship that's going to make me have a happy life. Relationships and exercise. You and I can go with the diet, but I think those are the two main forces there in keeping us alive longer. We've made incredible strides in extending life expectancy, especially in the early 20th century. But we all must die by about 100 or 105. The closer we get to the maximum end of life, the more time we spend being disabled. That is a universal species thing. You can see it in animals, dogs, if you have a dog, and you can see it in human beings. So for women, we have the same diseases, by the way. Living longer is a double-edged sword. You live longer, but you have more years, many more years of disability. And while rich people do live, especially females, to their 90s today, we still can't extend the maximum lifespan. Don't let anybody tell you differently. There is no evidence that we are close to extending the maximum lifespan, at least currently. We have to push back all diseases. We're living in longevity's golden age. Wonderful achievements. But if we're female, We need to plan wisely for our frail golden years, for our years of disability. And that's what I'm doing. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do now that I'm reaching my late 70s, when, as I expect, that's the price of living so long, I live disabled. And in another lecture, I'm going to give you my explorations into how you should decide on where you should live disabled, and with all of the pitfalls, in particularly in America, that entails in terms of finances. Big problem. I have lots of other things to talk to you about too, about aging, that are really good. We'll get there in another lecture. And before I end, I want you to go to my website, Belsky Being Human. We're going to go through every aspect of human life based on my experience writing textbooks for 50 years.